The wind never asked permission in the Wild West. It carved its way through dust memory and men who thought they had already lost everything. Caleb Foster was one of those men. Once known as a steady hand and a quiet soul, he now lived like a shadow at the edge of town, speaking more to the land than to people. Grief had made him careful. Silence had become his refuge. Then one afternoon, in the harsh light of a dying sun, Caleb saw her. A poor young girl stood near the general store, thin as hunger itself. Her eyes lowered her clothes worn by too many seasons. She looked like countless others the frontier had forgotten, except for one impossible detail. Around her neck hung a silver necklace. Old, scratched, familiar. Caleb's breath stopped. He knew that necklace. He had buried it years ago with the only woman he ever loved. No one else should have touched it. No one else should even know it existed. And yet there it was, resting against the heart of a stranger. In that moment, Caleb realized something terrifying. The past he had laid to rest was standing right in front of him, and it was about to demand an unthinkable choice. Before we step deeper into this story, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is right now. And if you enjoy emotional cinematic stories of the Wild West filled with mystery love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. Caleb Foster did not follow the girl at first. He stood where he was frozen, as if the earth beneath his boots had suddenly remembered his weight and decided to hold him there. The silver necklace had vanished beneath the girl's collar as she turned away, but the image of it remained burned into his eyes. That delicate curve of metal, the small imperfection near the clasp, the faint engraving that no one else had ever noticed, not even Rose, not until Caleb had pointed it out with a shy smile on the night he placed it around her neck. That necklace had been buried. He had watched the dirt fall over it with his own hands. Caleb told himself there had to be another explanation. In the West, coincidences happened. People lost things. People found things. Silver was silver. Memory was unreliable. Grief made liars of even the most honest men. But his chest would not loosen. The girl moved slowly down the street, as though she had learned long ago that moving too fast invited attention, and attention rarely came with kindness. She kept her head down, her shoulders slightly rounded, one arm held close to her body, as if protecting something invisible. When a group of men laughed too loudly near the saloon, she flinched. When a woman turned away sharply at her approach, she did not protest. She simply adjusted her step and continued on. Caleb watched it all. Something inside him stirred something he had not felt in years, not grief exactly, not yet. Recognition, perhaps, or the dull ache of seeing another soul worn thin by the same land that had once promised him everything. Against his better judgment, he began to walk. He kept his distance at first, following her past the general store, past the blacksmith shop, and toward the edge of town where buildings thinned and the road turned rough. Dust rose with every step, clinging to his boots, his coat, his past. The girl stopped near an abandoned fence post and set down a small bundle, a sack so light it could not possibly carry much of anything. She knelt. Caleb saw her hands shake as she untied the string. That was when the necklace slipped free. It caught the light for just a moment, swinging gently against her chest, unmistakable now. Caleb's heart gave a violent lurch. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. There was no mistake. The engraving was there. A tiny wildflower carved along the edge, Rose's favorite. He had paid extra for that detail, though he had never told her. He had wanted the necklace to know her, even if the world did not. The girl noticed him then. Her eyes lifted wide and dark, filled not with defiance, but with fear, the instinctive fear of someone who had learned that older men rarely approached with good intentions. She stood quickly, clutching the sack to her chest, ready to run. Caleb stopped several steps away. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She did not answer. "Sorry." He tried again, slower this time. "That necklace you're wearing, where did you get it?" Her hand flew to her throat. The motion was so quick, so protective, it told him more than words ever could. She shook her head and took a step back. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly. Her voice was young, but there was an oldness in it, the kind that came from sleeping outdoors and learning to listen for footsteps in the dark. "I'm not offering any," Caleb replied. "I just need to know." Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. The wind picked up, tugging at the girl's hair, lifting dust into the air. She glanced toward the town, then back at Caleb, measuring the distance between escape and danger. "It was given to me," she said at last. "By who?" She hesitated. "A woman," she answered. A long time ago. Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. Rose had never given that necklace away. He knew that with a certainty deeper than memory. She had worn it every day until the sickness took her strength. And even then, she had asked Caleb to place it back around her neck before she slept. Where, he asked. The girl shook her head again. I don't know. Not really. We didn't stay long anywhere. The word lodged itself in his chest. Who's we? He asked. Her eyes dropped to the dirt. Just me. Mostly. Caleb studied her face, the sharp cheekbones, the faint bruise near her temple she had tried and failed to hide, the exhaustion etched into someone far too young to carry it. This was not a thief, not a con artist. This was a girl who had survived by keeping what little the world had given her. And yet that necklace did not belong to the world. It belonged to his grave. You can keep it, he said suddenly. The girl looked up, startled. I'm not here to take it from you, Caleb continued. I just want to understand how it came to be on your neck. Her brow furrowed suspicion, replacing fear. Why? Because it was buried with my wife. Because I watched it disappear beneath the dirt. Because if you're wearing it, then something I believe to be finished is not. Instead, he said, because it matters to me. The girl studied him for a long moment, then slowly loosened her grip on the sack. My name's Abigail, she said. Abigail Turner. Caleb nodded. Caleb Foster. The name meant nothing to her, but it echoed in the empty space between them all the same. Abigail hesitated, then spoke softly. The woman who gave it to me said it would keep me safe. She said it belonged to love, and love was hard to kill. Caleb felt his throat tighten. She told me to never sell it, Abigail continued, no matter how hungry I got. Caleb closed his eyes. Rose had always believed in foolish things like that. Love as a shield, memory as a promise. She had believed the past could protect the future if you treated it gently enough. When Caleb opened his eyes, he realized his hands were shaking. Where is that woman now? He asked. Abigail's gaze drifted toward the horizon where the land stretched empty and endless. Gone, she said, like everyone else. The word gone settled heavily between them. From the edge of town, voices rose, laughter from the saloon, sharp and cruel. Someone called out something Caleb could not hear, but Abigail stiffened all the same. They don't like me staying too long, she said. Caleb followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. Then don't, he said. She frowned. Where would I go? Caleb hesitated. For years, his cabin had been a place of silence and ghosts, a space carefully guarded against hope. No one crossed its threshold anymore. No one was invited. No one was needed. But the necklace burned between them like a quiet accusation. You can come with me, he said. Abigail's eyes widened. I don't even know you. That makes two of us, Caleb replied. The wind howled, lifting dust around their feet as the town loomed behind them, watching, judging, waiting. Abigail looked once more toward the road, then back at Caleb Foster, the lonely cowboy with grief in his eyes and something dangerous in his voice. She nodded, and in that moment Caleb knew whatever truth had buried itself alongside his wife was no longer willing to stay buried. The road to Caleb Foster's cabin wound away from the town like a confession whispered too late. It cut through dry grass and stubborn stones, past land that had learned to endure without asking questions. Abigail walked a few steps behind him, careful where she placed her feet, as though the earth itself might object to her presence. Caleb did not look back at first. He feared that if he did, the courage that had pushed him to speak would dissolve into doubt. He had lived too long alone to invite anyone into the quiet he had built. His cabin was not a shelter, it was a boundary, a place where memory stayed contained, where grief could be folded neatly into corners and ignored. Yet every step forward felt inevitable. The wind shifted as they climbed the small rise where the cabin stood, weathered and gray, its porch sagging with age. It was not much, but it had survived storms, winters, and years of silence. Caleb had repaired it when it broke, not out of hope, but habit. Abigail stopped at the foot of the steps. This is yours, she asked. Caleb nodded. It's enough. She studied the place, her expression unreadable. To someone like her, a roof, any roof, was a miracle wrapped in caution. You don't have to stay, Caleb said quietly. I can give you food, water, then you can go. Abigail lifted her chin slightly. You wouldn't have brought me this far if you wanted me to leave. Caleb did not answer. He pushed the door open and the cabin greeted them with the smell of wood, old smoke, and something softer beneath it, lavender oil, faint but persistent. Abigail paused, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. This place, she murmured. It feels like someone's still here. Caleb's chest tightened. Someone is, he said. Just not the way you mean. He set his hat on the table and crossed to the small stove, moving with the automatic precision of a man who had repeated the same motions for years. He poured water, set a pot to heat, and handed Abigail a piece of bread from a tin. She took it with both hands, whispering a quiet thank you before eating slowly, as though afraid it might disappear if she rushed. Caleb watched her, then looked away. On the wall above the bed hung a small framed photograph, edges worn thin. Abigail noticed it almost immediately. "Is that her?" she asked gently. Caleb followed her gaze. Rose Foster smiled out from the faded image, her eyes warm, her hair pinned back loosely, as if she had laughed just before the picture was taken. She had been beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth, and everything to do with kindness. "Yes," Caleb said, "that's Rose." Abigail swallowed. "She looks like she loved you." Caleb closed his eyes. "She did," he said, "and I loved her back." That was the easy part. He had not meant to say that aloud. The words escaped him raw and unguarded. Abigail waited. Caleb sat heavily in the chair by the table, his gaze fixed on the floor. Rose got sick in the winter. Fever took her strength first, then her breath. By spring, she was gone. "I'm sorry," Abigail said. "So was I," Caleb replied, but being sorry didn't bring her back. Silence filled the space between them, broken only by the soft simmer of the water on the stove. "I buried her on the hill," he continued, "where she could see the sunrise. She liked mornings." Abigail's fingers tightened around the bread. "And the necklace?" she asked carefully. Caleb's jaw clenched. "That necklace was the last thing I gave her," he said. "I buried it with her because I couldn't bear the thought of it being anywhere else." He looked up, then meeting Abigail's eyes. "So when I saw it on you," he said, his voice low, "it felt like the ground had opened up." Abigail reached instinctively for the silver chain at her throat. "I swear," she said quickly, "I didn't steal it. I didn't even know it was yours." "I believe you," Caleb replied. She hesitated, then spoke. "The woman who gave it to me, she was sick too. Not like your wife. Different. She could still walk, but she was tired all the time." Caleb leaned forward. "Where did you meet her?" Abigail frowned, searching her memory. "Near a river. I was younger. She found me crying and sat with me until I stopped." The room seemed to tilt. "What was her name?" Caleb asked. "She said to call her Rose." Abigail answered softly, "But she told me it wasn't the name she was born with." Caleb's breath left him in a slow, broken exhale. "Rose. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be." "She told me stories," Abigail continued, "about love, about choosing kindness even when the world doesn't deserve it. She said if I ever found myself alone, the necklace would remind me that someone once cared." Caleb stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "My wife never left this land," he said. "She never walked to any river after she fell ill. She couldn't." Abigail's face paled. Then, "I don't understand." Neither did he. The water boiled over, hissing, as it spilled onto the stove. Caleb did not move to stop it. His thoughts raced, colliding with memory and doubt. Had he buried the wrong body? Had someone lied to him? Or was grief playing tricks crueler than any man? Caleb forced himself to breathe. "You should rest," he said at last. "You can sleep here tonight." Abigail nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. As she lay down on the narrow bed, Caleb stepped outside onto the porch. The night air hit him like a confession he was not ready to hear. Stars stretched endlessly above him, indifferent and eternal. Footsteps approached bit from the road. Caleb's muscles tensed as a familiar shape emerged from the darkness. "Evening, Caleb," said Deputy Owen Briggs. "What do you want?" Caleb asked flatly. Briggs glanced toward the cabin door. "Word travels fast. Folks saw you bring a girl out here." "That's my business." Briggs hesitated, then sighed. "That necklace she's wearing. You really don't want to start asking questions about it." Caleb stepped closer. Why not? Briggs met his gaze, something like guilt flickering in his eyes. "Because," he said quietly, "some graves in this town were never meant to be opened." Caleb felt the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. "And some truths," Briggs added, turning away, "will cost you more than you're ready to lose." Caleb watched him disappear into the dark, his heart pounding with a certainty that frightened him more than grief ever had. The past was not only alive, it was waiting. Morning came to Caleb Foster's cabin without ceremony. No birds announced it. No breeze softened the edges of the night. The sun rose pale and distant, casting long shadows across the porch, as if reluctant to touch what lay inside. Caleb had not slept. He sat at the small table, his hands wrapped around a tin cup gone cold, listening to the faint rhythm of breathing from the other side of the room. Abigail slept uneasily. Even in rest, she seemed prepared to flee. Her brow tightened, her fingers twitched against the thin blanket, and once she whispered something he could not hear. Caleb did not move closer. He had learned long ago that some wounds closed only when left undisturbed. His thoughts circled the same question again and again. How could Rose have given away that necklace? He rose quietly and stepped outside. The land looked unchanged, endless, patient, uncaring. The hill where Rose was buried lay just beyond the rise, invisible from the cabin, but always present in Caleb's mind. He had chosen that place because it felt permanent. Now nothing felt certain. When Abigail finally stirred, the sun had climbed higher. She sat up slowly, blinking, then froze when she realized where she was. "You didn't leave," she said. Caleb turned. "Neither did you." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I thought..." She trailed off, embarrassed. "I thought maybe I'd wake up, and this would all be gone." Caleb understood that feeling too well. He set a plate of food on the table, eggs, bread, a bit of dried meat. Abigail hesitated, then sat her movements cautious but grateful. "Thank you," she said softly. They ate in silence for a while. The kind of silence that pressed gently, rather than painfully, filled with unasked questions. "You said the woman who gave you the necklace found you crying," Caleb said at last. "How old were you?" Abigail frowned, thinking. 8, maybe 9. And before that, he asked, "Where were you living?" Her fork paused mid-air. "I don't remember," she said. Caleb studied her face. "No one remembers nothing." "I remember pieces," Abigail replied quickly. "Cold nights, different names, people who didn't stay." Her voice hardened as if she were reciting a practiced answer. Caleb recognized the sound. It was the sound of survival. "Did anyone ever tell you who your parents were?" he asked. Abigail shook her head. "No." Caleb leaned back the chair, creaking beneath him. "What about your last name, Turner?" she said. "That's what the woman called me." "The same woman who gave you the necklace?" "Yes." Caleb felt a familiar unease settle in his chest. "And where did she go?" he asked gently. Abigail's eyes dropped to the table. "She told me to run. She said there were people who would ask questions, people who didn't want the past remembered." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Who?" he pressed. Abigail's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. "She never said, but she was afraid. Not of dying, she was afraid of being found." A knock sounded at the door. Abigail jumped. Caleb stood at once, his body moving on instinct. He placed himself between Abigail and the door before opening it a crack. Reverend Samuel Whitmore stood outside, his expression, solemn hat held respectfully in his hands. "Morning, Caleb," he said. "May I come in?" Caleb hesitated, then stepped aside. The Reverend's gaze fell on Abigail, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. "I didn't know you had company," Whitmore said. "Neither did I," Caleb replied flatly. Whitmore smiled faintly. "The town's talking." Caleb crossed his arms. "They always are." Whitmore nodded. "They say you took in a girl." "A stranger." Abigail stiffened. "She's not a criminal," Caleb said. "I didn't say she was," Whitmore replied. "But people fear what they don't understand, especially when it reminds them of things they'd rather forget." Caleb's gaze sharpened. "What things?" Whitmore sighed. "The past has a way of resurfacing here, usually when it's least convenient." He turned to Abigail. "Child, how long have you been traveling?" Abigail hesitated, then answered, "As long as I can remember." Whitmore studied her carefully. "And the necklace you wear, do you know where it came from?" Abigail's hand moved instinctively to her throat. "It was a gift," she said. Whitmore nodded slowly. "From whom?" "A woman named Rose," Abigail replied. The Reverend's face went pale. He recovered quickly, but not before Caleb saw it. Whitmore cleared his throat. "I see." Caleb stepped forward. "You know something." Whitmore met his gaze. "I know that names have power, and that some names were meant to be buried." "Along with the truth?" Caleb asked. Whitmore said nothing. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "I came to warn you," Whitmore said finally. "Hank Dobbs is stirring up trouble. Says the girl's a liar. Says she's brought a curse." Abigail shrank slightly at the words. "Ignore him," Caleb said. Whitmore shook his head. "It's not that simple. When fear finds a voice, it rarely stops talking." He turned to leave, then paused. "Caleb, if you care for that girl, you do well to learn where she truly comes from, before someone else decides for you." After he left the cabin, felt smaller. Abigail stared at the floor. "I didn't mean to cause problems." Caleb knelt in front of her. "You didn't. But everyone thinks I did," she whispered. Caleb hesitated, then reached out, resting his hand gently over hers. "They don't know you," he said, And they don't know what they're afraid of. She looked up at him, eyes shining. What if they're right? Caleb's voice was steady. Then we'll face it together. The words surprised them both. That afternoon, Caleb rode into town for supplies, leaving Abigail at the cabin with strict instructions to stay inside. She promised she would, but curiosity is a dangerous companion. When the sun dipped lower, Abigail stepped onto the porch. She could see the road winding toward town, empty and inviting. Something tugged at her, a feeling she couldn't name. She walked. At the edge of town, Hank Dobbs spotted her first. "Well, look what wandered back," he sneered. "The girl with the dead woman's jewelry." People turned. Murmurs rose. Abigail froze. "You don't belong here," Hank continued loudly. "Never did." Before Abigail could speak, a woman stepped forward, Mrs. Lillian Crow, her eyes locked onto the necklace, her face draining of color. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's hers." Abigail's heart pounded. "Whose?" someone asked. Mrs. Crow swallowed hard. The woman who was never supposed to leave that grave. Abigail felt the crowd close in around her as the truth she didn't know began to surface. The square fell silent in a way that felt unnatural. Abigail stood at its center, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Faces surrounded her, some curious, some hostile, some afraid. The necklace lay exposed against her chest, its silver catching the dying light of the afternoon like a quiet accusation. Mrs. Lillian Crow's whisper seemed to echo through the stillness. "The woman who was never supposed to leave that grave. What does that mean?" someone demanded. Mrs. Crow did not answer at first. Her eyes remained fixed on the necklace, wide and glistening, as if she were seeing a ghost. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "It means," she said slowly, "that some of us were told a story years ago, and we were told never to question it." Hank Dobbs scoffed loudly. "Stories don't walk around wearing dead women's jewelry." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Abigail's legs felt weak. She took a step back, instinctively searching for an escape that wasn't there. "I didn't steal it," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I swear." Hank laughed. "That's what they all say." Mrs. Crow turned on him sharply. "Enough, Hank. This isn't a joke." "Then tell us what it is," Hank shot back. "Because all I see is trouble." Abigail's breath came fast and shallow. She clutched the necklace, wishing she could disappear into the dust beneath her feet. That was when a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. "Step away from her." Caleb Foster's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood tall, despite the years pressing on his shoulders, his gaze steady and unyielding. The crowd parted reluctantly, making room for him, as though instinctively recognizing something dangerous in his calm. "She doesn't belong here," Hank said. "Neither does that necklace." Caleb moved to Abigail's side without hesitation. "She belongs where I say she belongs," Caleb replied. "And that necklace is none of your concern." A man near the saloon spat into the dirt. "Since when do you decide anything for this town?" Foster Caleb's eyes hardened. "Since you decided to forget what kind of place this was built on." Mrs. Crow took a shaky breath. "Caleb, you don't understand." "Then help me," Caleb said, turning to her. "Because I'm done pretending nothing happened." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Hank folded his arms. "You always were one for stirring old graves." Caleb did not flinch. Some graves were filled too quickly. A ripple of unease passed through the square. Abigail looked up at Caleb, her eyes wide. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." He turned to the crowd. "This girl is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." A tense silence followed. Then Hank smiled slow and cold. "Protection won't save her." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. "You'd be surprised." Deputy Owen Briggs appeared at the edge of the crowd, his hand resting near his belt. His eyes flicked from Abigail to the necklace, then to Caleb. "Let's all calm down," Briggs said. "No one's broken any laws." "Not yet," Hank muttered. Briggs cleared his throat. "Miss, you should go home." Abigail hesitated. "I don't have one." Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder. "You do." The crowd watched as Caleb guided her away, their whispers following like shadows. Trouble, liar, curse. Each word cut deeper than the last. Back at the cabin, Abigail collapsed onto the chair, her body trembling. "I shouldn't have gone," she said. "I should have listened." Caleb knelt in front of her. "They would have found you sooner or later." "They hate me," she whispered. "They're afraid," Caleb corrected, "and fear makes people cruel." Abigail stared at the necklace in her hands. "Maybe I should leave." If I'm gone, it'll stop. Caleb shook his head. Running only teaches them they were right. She looked up at him, tears shining. What if they are? Caleb was silent for a long moment. I buried my wife, believing the truth would stay quiet. If I did, he said finally, I was wrong, and I won't make that mistake again. Night fell heavy and fast. As darkness wrapped around the cabin, a knock came at the door. Caleb tensed, motioning for Abigail to stay back. He opened it to find Reverend Whitmore standing there, his face grave. You need to leave town, Whitmore said urgently. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Why Hank's calling a meeting? He wants the girl gone by force if necessary. Abigail gasped. Caleb's jaw tightened. I'm not going anywhere. Whitmore hesitated. Then you need to know the truth. Caleb leaned forward. All of it. Whitmore swallowed. Years ago when Rose fell ill. Not everyone believed she died when we said she did. The words hit Caleb like a blow. What are you saying? He demanded. I'm saying, Whitmore replied quietly, that there were reasons some of us needed Rose Foster to be declared dead. Abigail's heart raced. Why? She asked. Whitmore looked at her, his eyes filled with something like sorrow. Because her child vanished the same night she was buried. The room seemed to spin. Caleb stared at him. Rose didn't have a child. Whitmore shook his head. That's what we told you. Abigail felt the floor drop away beneath her feet. Then, who am I? She whispered. Whitmore's voice was barely audible. That he said is the question this town has been running from for 20 years. Outside voices rose in the distance, angry, determined. Caleb closed the door slowly, his mind racing. The past was no longer knocking. It was coming to take what it was owed. The noise reached the cabin before the people did. Boots scraped against stone. Voices overlapped in anger and certainty, the sound of a town that had already made up its mind. Caleb Foster stood with his back against the door, listening, counting the breaths between shouts as if they were seconds before a storm broke. Abigail stood near the bed, pale, her hands clenched at her sides. They're coming for me, she whispered. Caleb turned to her, his expression calm in a way that frightened her more than panic would have. They're coming for answers, he said. They just don't know it yet. Another shout rose, Hank Dobbs' voice unmistakable. Open up, Foster. We know she's in there. Reverend Whitmore hovered near the table, his face lined with regret. Caleb, you can still end this peacefully. Caleb met his gaze. Peace built on lies doesn't last. The door shuddered as someone struck it with a fist. Abigail flinched. What are you going to do? Caleb reached for his coat. He had avoided this moment for years, choosing silence over confrontation, solitude over truth. But the past had walked into his life wearing silver and fear, and it was no longer content to be ignored. I'm going to tell them who you are, he said. Abigail stared at him. You don't know who I am? Caleb's jaw tightened. I know enough. He opened the door before the crowd could break it down. Night air rushed in, carrying dust sweat and rage. The lanterns cast uneven light across familiar faces, neighbors' men he had once shared work with women who had eaten at his table long ago. At the center stood Hank Dobbs, arms crossed, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. There he is, Hank said. Thought you could hide her forever. Caleb stepped onto the porch. She's not hiding, he said. And neither am I. A man near the front sneered. Then hand her over. No, Caleb replied simply. The word landed hard. Hank laughed. You don't get to decide that. Caleb raised his voice, letting it carry across the gathered crowd. 20 years ago, my wife was buried on that hill. A ripple moved through the people. This was not where they had expected him to start. She was declared dead, Caleb continued, and we were told there were no questions left to ask. Hank shifted uneasily. What does that have to do with this girl? Caleb turned, gesturing back toward the doorway. Everything. Murmurs rose sharp and uncertain. There was a child, Caleb said, a baby who disappeared the same night Rose was buried. The crowd stilled. That's a lie, someone shouted. Caleb shook his head. No, that's the lie you were given. He stepped closer to the edge of the porch, his eyes burning with a fire long suppressed. I believed my wife died in that bed. I believed the grave held all that remained of her. I believed the people I trusted. Hank's face darkened. You're going too far, Foster. I'm not far enough, Caleb shot back. Because if there was a child and she lived, then everything we've told ourselves about that night is wrong. Abigail stood frozen just inside the doorway, her heart racing. Caleb turned slightly enough for her to see his profile. Abigail Turner, he said clearly. That name was given to you, not born to you. The crowd erupted. Enough, Hank shouted. This is madness! Caleb's voice cut through the chaos. Her name is Abigail Foster. The square fell into stunned silence. Abigail felt the world tilt violently beneath her feet. What did you say? She whispered. Caleb turned fully, now his gaze steady despite the storm around them. If you are Rose's child, then you are mine too. Gasps echoed through the crowd. You can't do that. Hank yelled. You can't just claim her. Caleb stepped forward. I just did. Abigail's breath came in sharp, broken pulls. Caleb, you don't know if it's true. I know, he said softly, that no child deserves to be hunted by lies. Deputy Owen Briggs pushed through the crowd, his face strained. Caleb, think carefully. If you say this out loud, there's no taking it back. Caleb met his eyes. Good. Briggs swallowed. If she's your daughter, then the law. The law failed her 20 years ago. Caleb replied. I won't. Hank's voice dropped dangerous and low. You're making yourself an enemy of this town. Caleb spread his hands. Then so be it. Abigail stepped forward despite herself. Stop, she pleaded. Please. I never asked for this. Caleb turned to her. No, he said gently, but it found you anyway. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Gasps rippled again. What's that? Hank demanded. A deed, Caleb said. My land, my home, everything I have. He held it up for all to see. I'm placing it in her name. The shock was immediate and total. You're giving her everything, someone shouted. Yes, Caleb said. Because if this town takes her from me, it'll have to take everything with her. Abigail stared at him, tears blurring her vision. Why would you do this? Caleb looked at her, his voice breaking for the first time. Because I already buried one person I loved to protect a lie. I won't bury you. Hank took a step forward, rage twisting his features. You're condemning us all. Caleb's gaze hardened. No, I'm freeing us. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a stone flew from the back of the crowd, striking the porch rail with a sharp crack. Liar, someone shouted. Another stone followed. Briggs raised his hand. Enough. Everyone go home. But fear had found its voice, and it would not be quieted. Caleb stepped back inside, pulling Abigail with him as the first rock shattered a window. The cabin plunged into chaos. Glass shouts, the sound of people losing themselves to anger. Caleb barred the door, his heart pounding. Abigail clutched his arm. What happens now? Caleb met her gaze, his expression grim but resolute. Now, he said, we find out how much the truth costs. Outside, the crowd roared louder, closer, and somewhere in the darkness, a gun cocked. The gunshot never came. Not right away. Instead, the night stretched tight as a wire, vibrating with voices, broken glass, and the heavy breathing of men who did not yet know how far they were willing to go. Caleb Foster stood with his shoulder pressed against the cabin door, listening as if his life depended on the rhythm of the crowd outside, because it did. Abigail crouched near the table, her hands shaking her back against the wall. The lantern flickered, throwing shadows that jumped and twisted like living things. Is someone hurt? She whispered. Not yet, Caleb said. That's what scares me. Another rock struck the cabin, thudding against the wood. Someone shouted for Caleb to come out. Another voice answered with a curse. The mob was no longer unified. It was splintering fear, pulling people in different directions. Deputy Owen Briggs' voice cut through the chaos. Put the guns down. This ends now. A bitter laugh answered him. You gonna arrest us all. Deputy. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. 20 years ago, he would have believed that order mattered. That law held weight. That truth once spoken would naturally find its place. Now he knew better. A soft knock came at the back window, 3 quick taps deliberate. Caleb stiffened. Stay here, he murmured to Abigail. He moved silently toward the window and lifted the curtain just enough to peer outside. Mrs. Lillian Crow stood in the shadows, her lantern shielded beneath her coat. Her face was pale drawn and resolute. Caleb unlatched the window and helped her inside. You shouldn't be here, he said. I know, she replied. That's why I came. Abigail rose to her feet, staring at the older woman. You said the woman was never supposed to leave that grave. Mrs. Crow swallowed hard. I said it because it's the truth, or at least the version we were told to believe. Caleb motioned her to the table. Then, start talking. Mrs. Crow glanced toward the door where angry voices still rose and fell like waves. Not much time, she said. Hank's lost control. He doesn't want answers. He wants this to go away. Abigail hugged her arms around herself. Why Mrs. Crow met her eyes. Because if you are who I think you are, then some of us helped commit a terrible wrong. Caleb's jaw tightened. Who? Mrs. Crow hesitated. The doctor, the undertaker, and the men who stood guard that night. Caleb felt the room tilt. They told us Rose was dead. Mrs. Crow continued. Said the fever took her quickly. Said the baby didn't survive the birth. Abigail's breath caught. But I heard her cry. Mrs. Crow whispered. Not Rose. The baby. I heard it when they brought the coffin out. Caleb slammed his hand against the table. Then why didn't you say anything? Mrs. Crow's eyes filled with tears. Because Hank Dobbs was standing right there with a rifle. And because fear makes cowards of decent people. A shout from outside made them all flinch. They're bringing torches, Abigail whispered. Caleb turned back to Mrs. Crow. Do you have proof? Mrs. Crow nodded slowly. Not much, but enough. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded scrap of yellowed paper. This fell from the doctor's bag the night Rose was buried, she said. I kept it. I didn't know why, only that I couldn't destroy it. Caleb unfolded the paper, his hands trembling. It was a medical note, dates, measurements. A single line written in hurried ink, mother stable, infant breathing. Caleb's vision blurred. Abigail stared at the words as if they were written in another language. Infant breathing, she whispered. Yes, Mrs. Crow said. You were alive. A crash at the front of the cabin interrupted them. The door rattled violently. Foster Hank's voice roared. You're out of time. Caleb folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat. Mrs. Crow grabbed his arm. You need to leave, both of you. Tonight. Caleb shook his head. Running won't fix this. It might save her life. Mrs. Crow shot back. Abigail looked between them. I don't want to be the reason anyone dies. Caleb met her gaze, his expression fierce and tender all at once. You're the reason someone lived. Another crash. The door splintered slightly. Deputy Briggs can't hold them much longer, Mrs. Crow warned. Caleb made his decision. There's a cellar, he said, under the floor. Abigail blinked. What? My wife used it for supplies, Caleb explained quickly. It leads to the ravine. You can slip out unseen. Mrs. Crow shook her head. You're not coming. Caleb smiled sadly. Someone has to keep them talking. Abigail grabbed his coat. You can't stay. I already buried the truth once, he said softly. I won't do it again. He pressed the folded paper into Abigail's hand. This belongs to you. Her fingers closed around it, shaking. Come with us. Caleb cupped her face gently. If I do, they'll hunt you harder. Let me be the reason they stay here. The front door cracked again. Caleb pulled open the floorboard, revealing the dark opening beneath. Mrs. Crow climbed down first, then turned back to Abigail. Stay close to me. Abigail hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I don't even know what to call you, she whispered to Caleb. He smiled, eyes wet. Call me the man who chose you. She descended into the darkness just as the door burst open. Hank Dobbs stormed inside, flanked by several men, torches blazing. Where is she? Hank demanded. Caleb stood alone in the lantern light, his hands empty, his posture unyielding. She's gone, he said. Hank's eyes narrowed. Then you'll pay for it. Caleb felt the weight of years settle on him, not as grief, but as resolve. Maybe he replied, but not tonight. Outside Mrs. Crow and Abigail moved silently through the ravine, the paper clutched tightly between them. Behind them, the cabin erupted in shouts and firelight, and ahead of them, the truth, fragile, dangerous, and alive, waited to be claimed. The ravine swallowed sound. Moonlight filtered down in pale ribbons, catching on stone and scrub, turning every movement into a shadow that felt larger than it should. Abigail followed Mrs. Lillian Crow carefully, her heart pounding, the folded paper pressed tight against her chest. Each step away from the cabin felt like a betrayal and a rescue at the same time. They did not speak until the ground leveled and the night opened into a narrow stretch of trees by the river. Mrs. Crow stopped at last, leaning against a cottonwood, as if the weight of the past had finally found her bones. This is where it happened, she said. Abigail looked around. The river moved quietly, indifferent the way it must have all those years ago. What happened? Mrs. Crow closed her eyes. The night Rose was buried. This is where the baby was brought. Abigail's breath caught. Me. Yes. The word fell heavy between them. Mrs. Crow took a long breath, then began, her voice low and steady, as though she had rehearsed this confession in silence for decades. Rose came to me weeks before she died. She was afraid, not of the illness of the men who had begun asking questions. She said there were debts owed, secrets tangled up with land and money. things she didn't understand until it was too late. Abigail listened, scarcely daring to breathe. She begged me to take you somewhere safe, Mrs. Crow continued, but I was afraid. I had a husband, children. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. Shame flickered across her face. So she went to the doctor instead, Mrs. Crow said. A man she trusted, or thought she did. Abigail's hands trembled. And he helped them. He helped himself. Mrs. Crow replied bitterly. They decided Rose would die on paper. The baby would disappear. And the land, Caleb's land, would be left undisturbed. Abigail frowned. Why the land? Mrs. Crow hesitated. Because there was oil, not discovered yet but suspected, and some men wanted to make sure no future claim complicated matters. The truth struck Abigail like cold water. All this she whispered because of money. Yes, Mrs. Crow said softly, and fear. Fear of a woman who asked too many questions. Fear of a child who could inherit everything. Tears slid down Abigail's cheeks. What happened to Rose? Mrs. Crow's voice faltered. She lived longer than they expected, long enough to realize what they'd done. She escaped that night, weak but determined. She came here holding you and gave you to me. Abigail's heart raced. You raised me. Mrs. Crow shook her head. No, I was a coward. I took you as far as the river, then handed you to a woman passing through, a kind soul. She promised to keep you moving, to keep you hidden. Abigail swallowed. The woman who gave me the necklace. Yes, Mrs. Crow said. Rose followed for as long as she could. When she collapsed, she gave the necklace to the woman and told her to protect you, to make sure you never forgot that you were loved. Abigail closed her eyes. All those years, all that wandering, not abandonment but sacrifice. And Rose? Abigail asked. What became of her? Mrs. Crow's gaze drifted to the water. She didn't survive the winter, but she died knowing you were alive. Abigail pressed a hand to her mouth, grief and relief colliding in her chest. Why tell me now, she asked after a long silence. Why not sooner? Mrs. Crow's shoulders sagged. Because I thought the truth would destroy Caleb, and because I believed silence was safer. She met Abigail's eyes. I was wrong. The river whispered beside them, carrying secrets downstream. What do I do now? Abigail asked. Mrs. Crow hesitated. You have a choice, one that Rose never had. Abigail frowned. What choice? You can disappear, Mrs. Crow said gently. Take the proof. Go somewhere far from here. Live a quiet life. And, Caleb, Abigail asked. Mrs. Crow's lips pressed thin. He'll survive. He always has. Abigail shook her head. That's not a choice. That's running. Mrs. Crow studied her. Then the other choice is to return, to face them, to claim what is yours. Abigail's breath caught. That would tear him apart. It would, Mrs. Crow agreed, and it would tear this town open. Abigail stared at the folded paper in her hands. Rose chose silence to protect him, she said. If I speak, I undo her sacrifice. Mrs. Crow placed a hand over Abigail's. Or you complete it. Abigail's thoughts raced. She imagined Caleb standing alone in the lantern light, taking the weight of the crowd on his shoulders. She imagined him learning the truth, not slowly, gently, but all at once. Would he hate me? She whispered. Mrs. Crow shook her head. No, he would blame himself. The answer hurt more than hate ever could. A sudden shout echoed faintly in the distance. They both froze. Search the ravine, a voice called. Hank. Mrs. Crow's eyes widened. They followed. Abigail's pulse thundered in her ears. We need to go back. Mrs. Crow grabbed her arm. Are you mad? They'll tear you apart, they won't, Abigail said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Not if I give them something they can't ignore. Mrs. Crow stared at her. What are you planning? Abigail unfolded the paper, slowly smoothing it with trembling fingers. I'm going to show them the truth. And, Caleb, Mrs. Crow pressed. Abigail closed her eyes, then looked up, resolve hardening in her expression. I'm going to ask him to do the one thing he's never done, she said. Let go of the past, even if it costs him everything. Torches flickered between the trees, growing closer. Mrs. Crow squeezed Abigail's hand. Once you step back into that town, there's no turning away. Abigail nodded. I know. She turned toward the lights, the river behind her, the truth burning in her hands. And somewhere ahead, Caleb Foster waited, unaware that the next choice she made would change not only who she was, but who he had ever believed himself to be. The town looked different at night. Lanterns lined the square like a row of watching eyes, their light trembling in the wind. Shadows stretched long and crooked across the dirt, clinging to boots and doorways. Abigail stepped into that light, with Mrs. Lillian Crow beside her, the folded paper pressed flat against her palm, as though it might steady her heart. The crowd turned. Whispers rose sharp, startled, afraid. She's back. She came back. Why would she come back? At the far end of the square, Caleb Foster stood between two men. His shoulders squared, his face marked by soot and fury. The broken window of his cabin had cut his cheek. A thin line of blood traced down toward his jaw. When he saw Abigail, his breath left him in a rush he could not control. "Abigail," he said. The sound of her name in his voice pulled something loose inside her. Hank Dobbs stepped forward. Anger coiled tight in his posture. "You've got nerve," he snarled. "Coming back here after what you've done." Abigail did not look at him. She walked straight toward Caleb. "I came back for you," she said. Caleb shook his head, disbelief flickering across his face. "You shouldn't have." "I know," she replied softly, "but I had to." The crowd murmured, confused and uneasy. Deputy Owen Briggs raised his hand. "Everyone stay back." Hank laughed bitterly. "Oh, let her speak. I'd love to hear what lie she's brought us this time." Abigail's fingers tightened around the paper. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. "I know who I am," she said. The square fell quiet. Caleb stared at her. "What do you mean?" Abigail turned fully toward him. The lantern light revealed the exhaustion in her face and something else beneath it. "Resolve. My mother was Rose Foster," she said. The words struck the night like a gunshot. A wave of sound crashed over the square. Gasps, protests, laughter, sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible!" Someone shouted. Caleb did not move. He felt as though the ground had vanished beneath him. Abigail continued her gaze, never leaving his. "She lived longer than anyone told you. Long enough to give me away. Long enough to choose my life over her own." Caleb's lips parted, but no sound came. "She loved you," Abigail said, "and she trusted you. That's why she made the hardest choice she ever had to make." Caleb took a step forward, his voice breaking. "You're wrong." Abigail shook her head. "I wish I were." She held out the folded paper. "This is proof." Deputy Briggs moved closer, peering at it. His face drained of color as he read. Hank snatched the paper from Briggs's hand. "This is nonsense." Mrs. Crow stepped forward. "It's the doctor's writing." "You know it is." Hank's jaw tightened. "You should have stayed quiet." Abigail's breath caught. Caleb finally found his voice. "All these years," he whispered, "I stood at that grave believing I had failed her." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't fail her. You honored what she asked." Caleb shook his head slowly. "She asked me to bury the truth. And she asked me to live." Abigail replied. Those two things were never meant to last forever. Silence pressed in around them. Caleb's hands trembled. He pressed them against his thighs as if grounding himself. "If this is true," he said hoarsely, "then everything I believed, everything I built my life on, was built on a lie." Abigail finished gently. "Not by you." Hank took a step forward, his voice hard. "Enough of this. We're not letting this tear the town apart." Caleb turned on him, eyes blazing. "It already has." Briggs raised his voice. "Hank, stand down." Hank sneered. "Or what?" Briggs hesitated. The pause told everyone everything. Caleb stepped between Abigail and the crowd. "You want someone to blame," he said. "Blame me. I claimed her. I'll answer for it." Abigail grabbed his arm. "No." He looked at her, something like wonder and grief colliding in his eyes. "I already lost you once," he said quietly. "I won't lose you again." Abigail swallowed. "If you protect me now, they'll never stop." Caleb shook his head. "Let them come." Abigail stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Listen to me." He stilled. "I didn't come back to be hidden," she said. "I came back to finish what my mother started." Caleb's heart pounded. "What are you saying I'm saying?" Abigail continued, voice steady, "that you don't have to fight this alone, and you don't have to fight it by sacrificing yourself." Hank laughed sharply. "You think words will save you?" Abigail turned to him at last. "No," she said, "but truth might." She faced the crowd again. "I don't want your land. I don't want your money. I don't want revenge." Murmurs rippled through the square. "I want one thing," she said. For Caleb Foster to stop carrying a burden that was never his. Caleb felt his chest tighten painfully. She turned back to him, tears spilling freely now. "If you stand beside me as my father, they will destroy you." Caleb shook his head. "If I don't, I destroy myself." Abigail took his hands in hers, her grip firm. Then let me choose this time. Caleb's breath caught. Choose what? Choose to let me go, she whispered. Not out of fear, out of love. The words sliced deeper than any blade. Caleb closed his eyes. He saw Rose's smile. The grave on the hill, the empty years that followed, and now this life returned asking him to release it. The crowd held its breath. Caleb opened his eyes and looked at Abigail, really looked at her not as a mystery, not as a symbol, but as a living, breathing woman standing on the edge of her own future. His voice was barely audible. If I let you go, he said, who am I without you? Abigail smiled through her tears. The man who finally told the truth. A single lantern guttered its flame, flickering dangerously low. Caleb tightened his grip on Abigail's hands, and in that moment, the choice before him became clear, one that would cost him either the daughter he had just found or the life he had spent 20 years trying to protect. Thunder rolled in from the west like a warning that had been ignored too long. The first drops of rain struck the dirt of the square, darkening it in uneven patches, as though the land itself were bracing for what was about to happen. Lantern flames guttered and hissed. The crowd shifted uneasy now, not with anger, but with anticipation. Caleb Foster still held Abigail's hands. The world had narrowed to that single connection. Her fingers were warm, real alive. 20 years of emptiness pressed against that truth, demanding an answer. If I let you go, Caleb had said. And now the moment had come. The rain fell harder. Hank Dobbs wiped water from his brow and scoffed. Well, are we done with the drama? Caleb lifted his head slowly. He released Abigail's hands. The small sound of separation skin leaving skin felt louder than the thunder. Tsumbar! Abigail's breath caught, but she did not look away. Caleb turned to face the crowd. This ends tonight, he said. Rain streaked down his face, blurring the line between water and tears. I claimed her because it was the only way to keep her alive, Caleb continued. But claiming her also keeps this town blind. Hank's lips curled, finally talking sense. Caleb shot him a sharp look. Don't mistake this for surrender, he turned back to Abigail. You asked me to let you choose, he said quietly. So I will. Abigail's heart pounded. Caleb, I won't call you my daughter, he said, each word costing him something vital. Not here. Not like this. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Abigail felt a sharp ache in her chest, but she nodded. And I won't hide you, Caleb continued. I won't trade the truth for your safety. The rain intensified, drumming against roofs and shoulders alike. Caleb raised his voice. If she stays by her own name, by her own strength. Hank laughed. And what name is that? Abigail stepped forward before Caleb could answer. My name is Abigail, she said clearly. That's enough. The simplicity of it silenced the square. Caleb looked at her pride and grief intermingled. He turned back to the crowd. This town buried a woman alive, he said, then buried the truth on top of her. If there's justice left here, it won't be found by chasing another innocent person away. Deputy Owen Briggs shifted uneasily. Caleb, you're asking for chaos. No, Caleb replied. I'm ending it. A sudden flash of lightning split the sky, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. Someone screamed. In the confusion, a shot rang out. The sound tore through the storm like a blade. Abigail felt the impact before she heard it, the force knocking her backward, the world spinning violently as she hit the ground. Abigail Caleb roared. The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts, screams, bodies scattering. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her, rain soaking them both. Blood bloomed dark against her dress, spreading fast. No, 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 he whispered, his hands trembling as he pressed against the wound. Abigail gasped, her breath shallow. Caleb! Briggs shouted orders, his voice nearly lost in the storm. Who fired that shot? Hank stood frozen, his face pale. Caleb looked up slowly, his eyes burning with a fury unlike anything the town had ever seen. You wanted this to stop, Caleb said, his voice low and deadly. Now it will. He lifted Abigail carefully, cradling her against his chest. Stay with me, he whispered. Please. Abigail's fingers curled weakly into his coat. I chose, she murmured. Don't let them take it from me. Caleb swallowed hard. I won't. He carried her through the rain as Briggs struggled to restore order. Someone ran ahead to fetch the doctor. Others stood frozen, realizing too late what their fear had unleashed. Inside the cabin, Caleb laid Abigail on the bed, stripping away the soaked fabric with shaking hands. The wound was bad, but not where he had feared. She's alive, the doctor said moments later, his voice tight with urgency. But she needs rest. And she needs to leave town. Caleb nodded slowly. Outside, the storm raged on. Hours passed. The rain softened to a whisper by dawn, leaving the land washed raw and exposed. Caleb sat beside Abigail, never once letting go of her hand. She stirred just as the first light crept through the broken window. "You stayed," she whispered. Caleb leaned forward, his voice breaking. "Always." Her eyes searched his face. "Did you tell them?" Caleb nodded. "I told them the truth. Enough of it." Abigail closed her eyes. Then it was worth it. A knock came at the door. Caleb stood, every muscle tense. Deputy Briggs entered, his expression grave. "Hank's gone." Caleb frowned. "Gone left town before sunrise," Briggs said. "Took what he could carry." Caleb looked back at Abigail. Briggs lowered his voice. "There's going to be an investigation. People will talk. They'll look for someone to blame." Caleb met his gaze steadily. "They'll find me." Briggs hesitated. "If you stay." Caleb glanced at Abigail, alive, breathing fragile and fierce all at once. "No," Caleb said quietly. "They won't." He returned to her side and brushed damp hair from her face. "We're leaving," he told her softly. "Not because we're afraid, but because the truth deserves room to breathe." Abigail smiled faintly. Together, Caleb closed his eyes, the weight of the words settling deep. "Yes," he said. "Together." Outside, the storm clouds began to break apart, revealing a thin strip of pale blue sky. But beyond the horizon, something darker was already moving, a reckoning delayed, not defeated. And Caleb Foster knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The night had spared Abigail's life, but the price for the truth had not yet been fully paid. Morning did not bring peace. It brought quiet, the kind that settles after violence, when the world pretends it can move on without reckoning. Sunlight crept through the cabin's broken window, illuminating dust and the faint sheen of dried blood on the floor. Caleb Foster had not slept. He sat beside Abigail's bed, counting each rise and fall of her chest, as though it were a promise the world might still keep. She slept pale, but breathing, her brow furrowed even in rest. Outside, hooves passed on the road. Voices murmured, then faded. The town was already rehearsing its version of the night, softening edges, erasing names. A knock came at the door. Caleb stiffened. Deputy Owen Briggs stepped inside, hat in hand, his face drawn. He looked older in the daylight, as if the night had finally asked its price. "She needs to be moved," Briggs said quietly. "Soon." Caleb did not look up. "We're leaving." Briggs nodded. "I figured." A long silence followed. The weight of unfinished truths hung between them. "You should know Briggs said there's talk of an inquiry." Caleb finally met his eyes. "Talk doesn't scare me." "It should," Briggs replied, "when the wrong people start asking questions." Caleb stood slowly, careful not to wake Abigail. "The wrong people already did," he said. 20 years ago." Briggs swallowed. "You don't understand the forces at play." Caleb's gaze hardened. "Then help me understand." Briggs hesitated, then looked away. Hank Dobbs didn't act alone. Caleb felt a familiar cold settle in his chest. "I know." Briggs's eyes flicked to Abigail. "What happens if she wakes and learns the full truth?" Caleb answered, without hesitation. "She deserves it." Briggs sighed. "That's where we differ." Caleb took a step closer. "What did you do, Owen?" The deputy's jaw tightened. "I kept order." Caleb laughed, once short and bitter. "That's not an answer." Briggs leaned against the table, lowering his voice. "When Rose got sick, men came to me. Men with money, men who promised stability. They said chaos would follow if certain things came to light. And you believed them," Caleb said flatly. "I believe this town would burn," Briggs replied. "I believe sacrifice was necessary." Caleb's hands clenched. Whose sacrifice? Briggs did not answer immediately. Caleb stepped closer still. "Mine." Briggs looked up at him, then something like regret flickering in his eyes. "Yours was the cleanest." The words landed like a blow. "You let me bury my wife alive," Caleb said slowly. Briggs shook his head. "She wasn't alive when the coffin went into the ground." Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "But she was alive when you took my child." Briggs flinched. "I didn't take her," he said. "I made sure she disappeared." Caleb felt the room spin. "You decided that for us." Briggs' shoulders sagged. "I decided for the town." A soft sound came from the bed. Abigail stirred. Caleb turned instantly. "Abigail." Her eyes fluttered open. "I heard voices," she whispered. Briggs froze. Caleb moved to her side. "Rest." Abigail's gaze drifted to Briggs. "You knew," she said quietly. Briggs did not deny it. "You stood there all these years." Abigail continued, wearing that badge. knowing who I was. Briggs' voice broke. I thought you were safer not knowing. Abigail shook her head weakly. You were wrong. Caleb felt a surge of anger so sharp it threatened to blind him. You will not touch her again, he said. Ever. Briggs straightened. You don't have the authority to make that demand. Caleb met his gaze deadly calm. Try me. A long, dangerous silence followed. Then Briggs exhaled. There's something else. Caleb's stomach tightened. The men who paid for Rose's silence. They're still around, Briggs said. They've been watching. Abigail's fingers curled into the blanket. Watching what Caleb asked. Land records, Briggs replied. Oil surveys. Rumors of inheritance. Caleb felt the truth settle into place with brutal clarity. This was never about morality, he said. It was about ownership. Briggs nodded. And now that she's alive, officially or not, she's a problem. Abigail pushed herself up slightly. Then I'll leave. Caleb shook his head. No. Briggs raised a hand. Leaving might not be enough. Caleb turned sharply. Explain. They know she exists, Briggs said. They know you've claimed her publicly. They won't let this fade. Caleb's mind raced. Who are they? Briggs hesitated, then spoke a name that made Caleb's blood run cold. The Railroad Consortium, he said, and a senator who doesn't like complications. Abigail stared at him. All this because I lived. Yes, Briggs said softly. Caleb felt a grim resolve settle over him. Then we'll make living inconvenient, he said. Briggs shook his head. You don't understand. They can erase people. Caleb looked at Abigail, bruised, breathing unbroken. They tried, he said, and failed. Briggs stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you leave, don't go south. Don't follow the river. They'll expect that. Caleb studied him. Why are you telling me this? Briggs's eyes dropped. Because I'm tired of carrying it. Caleb's voice was cold. That doesn't make us even. I know, Briggs said, but it might keep her alive. A sound outside interrupted them. Hoofbeats, urgent, and many. Briggs's head snapped up. That's not local. Caleb moved to the window, peering out. Men rode hard toward the cabin, dust rising behind them, their coats cut finer than anything the town could afford. Caleb turned back, his expression grim. They've come for her. Abigail's heart pounded. What do we do? Caleb took her hand, his grip firm. We finish this, he said, on our terms. Briggs reached for his gun. Then you'll need allies. Caleb met his gaze, eyes blazing. You had your chance. The riders drew closer, and in that moment, Caleb Foster understood the final truth. The town had only been the beginning. The real enemy was just arriving. Caleb Foster did not look back when he left the cabin. He had spent too many years staring at what was already gone, at Graves' memories, and the shape of a life that never came to be. This time he forced himself to look forward, even though every step away felt like tearing something loose from his chest. Abigail rode beside him, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her movements slow and careful. The wound had weakened her more than she would admit, but she did not complain. She never had. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, dark and resolute, as if she were afraid that if she glanced back, she might lose her nerve. Behind them, the town shrank into dust and distance. Where are we going? Abigail asked quietly. Caleb adjusted the reins, north first, then west. Why north? Because they won't expect it, he replied. And because there's a judge up there who owes me his life. Abigail studied him. You never told me that story. Caleb exhaled. I was younger, dumber. Saved him from a river he shouldn't have crossed. She gave a faint smile. Seems like something you'd do. He did not smile back. They rode in silence for a long time, the land opening wide around them. Grass gave way to rock. Rock gave way to scrub. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, beautiful and merciless all at once. By midday, the pain caught up with Abigail. She swayed slightly in the saddle, her breath growing shallow. Caleb noticed immediately. We stop, he said. I'm fine, she protested weakly. He did not argue. He guided the horses into the shelter of a low canyon, helped her down, and eased her onto a bedroll. You don't have to carry this alone, she said after a moment, watching him prepare water and bandages. Caleb paused. I've been carrying things alone my whole life. She reached for his hand. Not anymore. The simple truth of it struck him harder than any accusation ever could. He cleaned the wound carefully, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. Abigail winced but did not cry out. You're strong, he murmured. She shook her head. I just didn't have a choice. Caleb met her eyes. You always have a choice, even when it doesn't feel like it. She studied him, then nodded slowly. They rested only as long as necessary. The land offered no mercy to those who lingered. As they rode again, Caleb's mind turned inward. For the first time in 20 years, he was not running from grief, but toward responsibility. He thought of Rose, of her smile, of the impossible decision she must have made alone. He wondered if she would recognize the man he had become. "I'm trying," he thought. "I hope that counts for something." The sun dipped lower when they reached the old trading road. Tracks crisscrossed the dirt, fresh, deliberate. Caleb reined in sharply. Abigail followed his gaze. "What is it?" "We're not alone," he said. Before she could respond, a voice carried from the rocks above them. "Easy now." 3 men emerged from the canyon walls, rifles resting casually against their shoulders. Their clothes were clean, their boots new, their eyes cold with calculation rather than hunger. Caleb placed himself between them and Abigail. "You boys lost?" he asked calmly. One of the men smiled thinly. "We're exactly where we meant to be." Caleb's grip tightened on the reins. "Then you've made a mistake." The man's gaze flicked past Caleb to Abigail. "She's the one." Abigail's heart raced. "She's injured," Caleb said. "You'll let us pass." The man chuckled. "You don't seem to understand how this works." Caleb met his eyes without flinching. "I understand it perfectly." The man sighed. "We were told to bring her back. Alive, preferably." "And me?" Caleb asked. The smile faded. "You weren't part of the instruction." That told Caleb everything. He moved faster than they expected. In one fluid motion, he fired a shot into the rock wall above them, sending stone and dust raining down. The horses bolted and Caleb dragged Abigail onto his saddle, spurring them forward through the confusion. Gunfire erupted behind them. The canyon exploded with sound and echo. Bullets chipped stone inches from their heads. Abigail clung to Caleb, her heart pounding wildly. "Hold on," he shouted. They burst out of the canyon and into open land, the horses running hard. One of the men gave chase his mount, powerful and relentless. Caleb glanced back, calculating. "Abigail," he said, breathless. "When I say jump, you jump." Her voice shook. "Why, trust me." The ground ahead dropped sharply toward a narrow creek bed. Now Caleb shouted. Abigail leapt as Caleb yanked the reins, sending his horse veering sharply while she tumbled down the embankment into brush and shadow. Caleb rode on, drawing the pursuer after him. Abigail lay still, heart hammering, listening to hoofbeats fade into the distance. Minutes passed, maybe longer. She forced herself to breathe. Then she heard another sound. Footsteps. Careful, searching. Her fingers curled around a stone. A shadow fell across her. She looked up into the face of the man who had smiled first. "Well," he said softly, "you didn't run far." Abigail's mind raced. "You don't want me dead," she said quickly. "You need me alive." The man tilted his head. "Smart girl." "Then listen," she continued, voice trembling but firm. "If you take me now, you'll have to answer for what happens next. People are watching." The man laughed quietly. "Not the right people." He reached for her arm. A gunshot rang out. The man stiffened, then collapsed forward, his grip loosening. Abigail gasped as Caleb appeared from the brush behind him, smoke rising from the barrel of his gun. "Don't touch her," Caleb said, his voice low and lethal. Abigail stared at him, relief flooding her body. Caleb knelt beside her, checking quickly for injuries. "Can you stand?" She nodded shakily. They did not wait. They rode hard until night swallowed the land whole. Only when the stars burned bright overhead did Caleb slow the horses. "They'll keep coming," Abigail said quietly. "Yes," Caleb replied. "But now they know something." She met his gaze. "What? That we won't disappear quietly." In the distance, a single lantern flickered movement far off, but deliberate. Caleb's jaw tightened. The road ahead was narrowing, and whatever waited at the end of it would demand a final price. They rode until the land lost its name. By the time dawn thinned the stars into a pale wash of gray, Caleb Foster had guided them off the main trail and into a stretch of country that maps rarely bothered to mark. The air here felt older heavy with the memory of things done and left undone. Abigail's body ached with every movement, but her eyes stayed sharp, scanning the horizon as if danger itself had learned to wear the shape of the day. Caleb slowed near a low cluster of cottonwoods bordering a dry wash. Beyond it stood a weathered building, half collapsed by time, its sign hanging crooked, Harrington & Co., Land Surveys. Abigail frowned. Why here? Caleb dismounted, his face unreadable. "Because the truth doesn't end with a grave," he said. "It ends with paper." Inside dust lay thick as snowfall. Sunlight pierced the broken roof in slanted beams, illuminating shelves of ledgers and rolled maps. Caleb moved with purpose, as if the room were not strange to him at all. He pulled one ledger free and set it on a table whose legs groaned in protest. Abigail watched him closely. "You've been here before." Caleb nodded once. "Years ago, after Rose got sick. I came looking for answers and found none worth keeping." He opened the ledger. Dates, parcels, names. "Read this," he said, turning the book toward her. Abigail leaned in. Her finger traced a line. Fosterland. Reassessed. Contingency claim. Her breath caught. Contingency for what? Caleb's jaw tightened. "For heirs." Abigail looked up. "They planned for me." "Yes," Caleb said, "before you were born." The realization landed with brutal clarity. This wasn't chaos. It was design. Caleb reached for a map and spread it flat. Lines crisscrossed the page like scars. He tapped a marked section near the river. Here, the survey that never made it public. Oil wasn't confirmed then, but it was close enough to tempt men with patience. Abigail swallowed. So they needed Rose declared dead. And me erased. Caleb nodded. And they needed someone to make it official. Footsteps sounded outside. Caleb stilled, then gestured for silence. He moved to the door and peered through a crack. A single horse stood in the wash. A familiar figure dismounted. Judge Elias Merrick. Caleb's breath left him in a long exhale. He stepped outside, his posture wary but respectful. "Elias," he said, "you're a long way from dry courtrooms." Merrick's lined face softened at the sight of him. "So, are you Caleb?" Abigail appeared at the doorway, and Merrick's eyes widened, then sharpened with recognition he did not try to hide. "So," Merrick murmured, "they told me you were dead." Abigail met his gaze. "They told everyone." Merrick nodded slowly. "I came because a message found me before the men did." He held up a small card, Lillian Crow's hand. "She said the truth was moving." "But," Caleb gestured inside. "Then help us finish it." They returned to the table. Merrick studied the ledgers, his expression darkening with every page. "This is worse than I thought," he said quietly. "They built contingencies on contingencies." Abigail's voice trembled. "Is there proof enough to stop them?" Merrick closed the book. "Proof enough to expose them," he said. "Stopping them is another matter." "Oh." Caleb leaned forward. "What do they want now?" Merrick met his eyes. "Control. If you vanish, they'll claim abandonment. If she vanishes, they'll claim death. Either way, they'll take the land." Abigail straightened. "Then we don't vanish." Merrick regarded her with measured respect. "That would require you to stand in public and claim what was stolen. Name names." Caleb shook his head. "They'll come for her." "Yes," Merrick said. "They will." Silence pressed down on them. Abigail looked at Caleb. "You told me the truth deserves room to breathe." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "I did." She took a breath. "Then I'll breathe it." Merrick raised a hand. "Before you decide, there's something you need to know." He reached into his coat and produced a sealed envelope, its wax cracked with age. This was filed the night Rose was buried. It was never delivered. Caleb's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay a single page, Rose's handwriting unmistakable. The words blurred as he read. "If you are reading this, then I failed to keep us safe. Forgive me. I chose our child's life over my own name. I chose silence so you might live without blood on your hands. If the truth ever finds daylight, let it be because our child chose it, not because you were forced." Caleb pressed the letter to his chest, grief and love colliding, until he could scarcely breathe. Abigail read over his shoulder, tears tracing quiet paths down her cheeks. "She trusted us," she whispered. "Both of us." Merrick cleared his throat. "There's more." He slid another paper across the table. A signature anchored the bottom. "Who is that?" Abigail asked. Merrick's voice was steady grave. "The Railroad's counsel, and beneath it Deputy Owen Briggs." The room seemed to tilt. Caleb's eyes burned. He signed off. "He did," Merrick said, "and he's not done." A distant engine-like rumble reached them. Horses, many of them. Merrick went to the window, his face tightening. "They're here." Caleb looked at Abigail. "You don't have to do this." She shook her head. "I already am." She turned to Merrick. "If I speak publicly today, will you stand with me?" Merrick nodded once. "I will." Caleb swallowed. "Then I'll stand behind you." The riders burst into view, coats flaring, rifles strapped with purpose. At their head rode Owen Briggs. Briggs dismounted, his expression composed. "Judge Merrick," he called. "You're trespassing." Merrick stepped forward. "On my conscience, perhaps. On the law." "Number." Briggs's eyes slid to Abigail. "You should have stayed gone." Abigail lifted her chin. "You should have told the truth." Briggs smiled thinly. "Truth is expensive." Caleb moved to Abigail's side. "We can afford it." Briggs raised a hand and the riders fanned out. hand over the papers. Merrick shook his head. No. Briggs' voice hardened. Then this becomes unpleasant. Abigail stepped forward, heart hammering but voice clear. Everyone will know. Briggs met her gaze. Not if you don't make it to town. Caleb's hand tightened around his gun. A single rider broke formation, galloping hard from the west, waving something white. Stop, the rider shouted. Injunction. The riders faltered. Briggs's face darkened. The messenger reined in breathless. Court order, he said, thrusting a document toward Merrick. Filed at dawn. Merrick smiled grimly. It begins. Briggs stared at the paper, fury flickering across his face. He looked at Abigail, then at Caleb. This isn't over, he said quietly. Caleb met his gaze. No, he replied. It's just finally begun. Thunder rolled far off, low and ominous. Abigail felt the weight of the next choice settle on her shoulders, a choice that would demand more than courage. It would demand sacrifice. The town gathered as if drawn by a wound it could no longer ignore. By mid-morning, the square filled with faces, some hardened by suspicion, others softened by the strange gravity of a truth, finally refusing to stay buried. Rain clouds hovered low, bruised and restless, mirroring the mood of the crowd. Word had traveled faster than the riders ever could. An injunction, a judge papers that could not be burned away. Abigail stood on the courthouse steps with Judge Elias Merrick beside her. The paper in her hands felt heavier than stone. Caleb waited a few paces behind, close enough to be felt, far enough to let her be seen. He had learned that love sometimes meant stepping back so another could step forward. Deputy Owen Briggs arrived last. He dismounted slowly, his badge catching the light. He did not look at Caleb. He looked at the crowd, measuring it the way a man measures risk. He had always done that well. Judge Merrick raised a hand. We are here to hear testimony relevant to land claims and the falsification of public records. Murmurs rippled. Abigail's throat tightened. She took a breath, remembering Rose's letter. Let it be because our child chose it, and began. My name is Abigail, she said. I was born the night my mother was declared dead. The square stilled. She told them everything. Not quickly, not theatrically. She spoke as if truth were a river, slow, relentless, impossible to dam forever. She spoke of the riverbank where she'd been handed to a stranger, of the necklace given as a promise, of the years spent moving so no one could decide who she was allowed to be. She held up the papers, the ledgers, the letter. This town was asked to believe a lie so it could stay comfortable. Abigail said, I don't want revenge. I want the lie to stop. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. A man looked down at his boots. Judge Merrick nodded to Briggs. Deputy, your name appears on these documents. Briggs stepped forward. His voice was even. I signed what I believed would prevent bloodshed. Caleb felt heat rise in his chest. He moved, but Merrick lifted a hand, prevented for whom Merrick asked. Briggs hesitated. For the town, and for the men who stood to profit, Merrick replied. Briggs' jaw tightened. Order matters. Abigail met his gaze. Not more than lives. The crowd shifted uneasy now, not with her, but with him. A shout came from the edge of the square. It's her land. Another answered. She should have it. Briggs raised his voice. You don't understand the consequences? Abigail nodded. I do. She turned to Caleb, then her eyes shining with something that hurt to see. This is where I choose. Caleb felt his heart stutter. Abigail, if I claim the land, she said gently, they'll keep coming. Courtsmen with money, quiet threats. They'll never stop. Caleb shook his head. We'll face it together. Us, she smiled, small and brave. I know. And that's why I can't ask you to. She turned back to the crowd. I am renouncing the claim. The square erupted. Caleb took a step forward. No. Abigail lifted a hand. Listen. Her voice carried clear unwavering. I don't renounce the truth. I renounce the fight that would consume us. I will not let my life become another battleground for men who think ownership is destiny. Judge Merrick's eyes searched her face. You understand what this means? Yes, she said. It means the land returns to the town trust until claims are settled honestly. It means no one profits from the lie. A stunned silence followed. Briggs exhaled slowly as if something had slipped from his grip. You'd give it all up. Abigail nodded. I keep what matters. Caleb felt the loss like a physical blow, then something else beneath it. Awe. Merrick spoke carefully. This will not absolve those who falsified records. Briggs stiffened. Merrick continued. But it will stop the immediate seizure and the quiet violence that follows. Abigail turned to Briggs. You can choose now. Tell everything, or keep carrying it. For a long moment, Briggs said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged. I'll testify, he said. Against the consortium. Against the council. Against myself. Gasps rippled through the square. Caleb closed his eyes. The cost was being paid in full. The sky darkened. Thunder murmured. As the crowd dispersed, Judge Merrick approached Caleb and Abigail. "What you did today will be studied," he said quietly. "And resented." Abigail smiled faintly. "I can live with that." Caleb took her hand. "Where will you go?" She looked out at the road. "Somewhere the truth can rest." He nodded. "I'll go with you." She shook her head just once. "Not yet." The words cut deeper than any accusation. "I need to walk this first step alone," she said softly. "So that when we walk together, it's not because we were cornered." Caleb swallowed. "How long?" She pressed the necklace into his palm. "Until I come back for it." He closed his fingers around the silver. "I'll be here." They stood there, the space between them humming with everything unsaid. A rider approached at speed, breathless. He handed Judge Merrick a telegram. Merrick read it, his face tightening. "Bad news," he said. "The consortium has filed a counteraction. They're moving assets fast." Abigail's heart quickened, meaning Merrick met her eyes, meaning the pressure will increase. "On witnesses. On you." Caleb stepped forward. "Then take me." Merrick shook his head. "They won't stop at you." Abigail felt the weight settle again. She turned to Caleb, searching his face. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. If they come for you, run." He shook his head. "No." She smiled sadly. "Then promise me you'll live." A crack of thunder split the sky. As dusk fell, Abigail mounted a borrowed horse at the edge of town. Caleb stood a few steps away, hat in hand. She looked back once. "I chose mercy," she said. "Don't make me regret it." Caleb's voice was steady. "You never will." She rode out as the first drops of rain fell again. Caleb watched until the road swallowed her whole. Behind him, the town breathed uneasy, altered. Ahead of him, the storm gathered strength. And somewhere beyond the horizon, men who hated mercy were deciding how much blood they were willing to spill to reclaim a lie. Winter arrived quietly. It did not come with storms or spectacle, only a thin veil of frost at dawn and a sky that learned to hold its breath. Caleb Foster woke each morning before the sun as he always had, but the days felt different now, lighter in one sense, heavier in another. The town had changed, or perhaps it had simply stopped pretending it hadn't. The courthouse steps stood empty most days. Judge Merrick traveled north to testify. Deputy Owen Briggs awaited trial, a man hollowed out by choices he could no longer outrun. The railroad men circled at a distance, wary, calculating, waiting for the story to lose its teeth. It never did. Caleb kept the cabin repaired through the early snows, replacing broken glass, mending the porch rail that had splintered the night the truth came to claim its due. He worked steadily, methodically, as if care itself were a language he was relearning. In the evenings, he sat by the fire with the silver necklace resting in his palm, its cool weight, a reminder and a promise. He did not know where Abigail was. He knew only that she was alive. Some nights he imagined her on the road, stronger now, walking with a steadier step. Other nights he imagined her far away, letting the world be kind to her for once. He had promised to live. He kept that promise the only way he knew how, by being ready when living asked more of him. The letter from Rose remained folded in his coat pocket, edges softened by touch. He read it often, not to reopen old wounds, but to remember that love had never abandoned him. It had simply taken a longer path. On a morning so cold, the creek steamed like breath. Caleb heard hooves. He looked up from the woodpile and froze. A lone rider approached at an easy pace, the horse familiar, the posture unmistakable even at a distance. The rider reined in a few yards away and dismounted. Abigail stood there dusted with frost, eyes bright and steady. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb crossed the distance in 3 long strides and pulled her into an embrace that held everything he had learned how to say without words. She returned it firm and certain, and when they parted, both were smiling through tears. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would," she replied, touching the necklace at her throat. "I came for this." He laughed softly. It waited. They went inside the cabin, warm and familiar. Abigail took in the small changes, the mended window, the new shelf, the quiet order of a life rebuilt with intention. "I didn't run," she said after a while, answering a question he hadn't asked. "I spoke. In places where people listen. It mattered." Caleb nodded. "I never doubted it." She sat across from him, the firelight catching her face. "They'll keep trying," she said, "but slower now. Carefully." "Then we'll live carefully," he replied. "Not afraid." Abigail smiled. That's what I learned. Mercy doesn't mean weakness. It means choosing what you refuse to become. They spoke late into the night of roads and names and small kindnesses that had kept her moving forward. Of Rose. Of the man Caleb had been and the man he was learning to be. When sleep finally came, it did not feel like escape. It felt like rest. Spring arrived with green at the edges of things. Abigail helped Caleb plant a small garden by the cabin, her hands sure in the soil. The town watched from a distance, then slowly stepped closer. A loaf of bread appeared on the porch, then a basket of eggs, then a quiet apology offered without ceremony. Not all wounds healed. Some never would, but the lie no longer owned the air. On the anniversary of Rose's passing, Caleb and Abigail climbed the hill at dawn. They stood together as the sun lifted light, spilling over the land Rose had loved. I used to think I failed her, Caleb said softly. Abigail shook her head. You kept her promise. He placed the necklace gently at the headstone for a moment, then lifted it again and set it back against Abigail's heart. This is where it belongs, he said, with the living. Abigail took his hand. And you, he smiled, with the truth. They descended the hill side by side, the future no longer something to be feared, but something to be met honestly together, and without the weight of borrowed silence. The land breathed, the past rested, and at last so did they. Some truths arrive gently, others arrive like storms, but all of them ask the same question: what will you choose to become once you know? In this story, mercy was not the absence of justice, it was the courage to stop repeating harm. Abigail learned that choosing truth does not require vengeance, and Caleb learned that love does not end when it changes shape, it deepens. Life often tempts us to protect ourselves with silence, to believe that comfort is the same as peace. But real peace comes from facing what hurts, naming it, and refusing to pass it on. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It frees the future. If this story moved you, share in the comments what lesson resonated with you most and where you're listening from today. And if you value stories that explore love, courage, and redemption, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Your presence here matters more than you know.